What was the first moment a human looked up at the sky and wondered if something, or someone, was watching back? Picture an ancient savanna 4 million years ago. The air trembles with heat. Our distant ancestors, small and cautious creatures, gather around the tall grass. They are not yet human as we know them, but inside their simple minds, something begins to stir. Curiosity, awe, fear. These emotions, born from survival, may have been the seeds of the very first sense of the sacred. Imagine an Australopithecus gazing at a thunderstorm. To us, it's only nature. To them, it's chaos made visible, a force that kills, burns, and shakes the earth. They don't understand it, but they feel it. The flash of lightning and the roar of thunder awaken an instinct that will later shape civilizations, the need to explain what cannot be controlled. And that explanation, primitive and emotional, would become the first spark of faith. It's not about temples or gods yet. It's about perception. When a predator kills a companion, when a storm destroys their shelter, or when a fire burns across the horizon, these early hominids may have sensed that invisible powers governed their world. This awareness, fragile but transformative, marks the beginning of a journey that would make humans unique among all species. Some scientists suggest that this spiritual awakening began as an evolutionary advantage. The ability to imagine invisible causes gave our ancestors foresight, empathy, and the power to cooperate around shared fears and hopes. Perhaps when one of them offered a fragment of food to the sky or murmured a sound to the wind, it was not only survival, it was the first attempt to speak with the supernatural. These ancient sparks of emotion, passed from generation to generation, became the foundation of myth, ritual, and religion. They were not yet words, but gestures and feelings, and through them, the story of human faith was set in motion, a story that would evolve, adapt, and survive longer than any species of flesh and bone. If you find this glimpse into our spiritual origins fascinating, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more journeys into the dawn of humanity, and tell us in the comments, when do you think humans truly began to believe? Before humans learned to speak, they listened, to the rustle of grass warning of predators, to the cry of a newborn, to the crack of thunder across the plains. Each sound carried meaning, and from meaning, emotion. Somewhere between survival and connection, communication began to take shape. And with it, the first attempts to express something beyond the visible world. Imagine a small group of early humans gathered under a vast night sky. The firelight dances across their faces, flickering like the pulse of a heartbeat. One of them points toward the stars and grunts, not in fear, but in wonder. Others mimic the gesture. Their sounds grow rhythmic, their movements more deliberate. These gestures and tones are primitive prayers, not words but the beginnings of reverence. When they saw the death of a companion, perhaps they imitated the stillness of the body, repeating the gesture in mourning. When rain returned after drought, they may have celebrated with chants or beats, primitive rituals of gratitude. Every movement, every sound, was a step toward something sacred. The attempt to communicate not only with each other, but with the unseen forces shaping their world. As language slowly emerged, these expressions deepened. Vocalizations once used for alarm or affection began to echo emotion, grief, joy, fear, awe. The rhythm of footsteps became the rhythm of chant. The swing of an arm became the dance of ritual. Communication and spirituality grew side by side, each strengthening the other. The more they could express, the more they could believe. Archaeologists studying ancient sites find hints of this early symbolism, markings on bones, rhythmic patterns of stones, traces of pigments that suggest intent, not accident. These fragments reveal that long before organized religion, there was already a hunger to translate the mysteries of existence into sound and gesture. This was humanity's first language of the divine, one built not from words but from emotion and movement. It was how our ancestors first tried to be heard by the forces they could feel but not name. And in those crude, trembling sounds, the human soul began to find its voice. What happens when survival meets terror? For the first humans, fear wasn't just an emotion, it was a teacher. Every shadow, every growl in the dark carried the potential for death. And in that constant tension between life and extinction, faith was born, not from comfort but from desperation. Imagine a storm breaking over the African savanna. Lightning splits the sky, thunder shakes the ground. To early humans, this wasn't weather. It was a living force, unpredictable and immense. The rain could bring life or destruction, and they had no control over which. Out of this helplessness emerged a vital instinct, the need to appease the powers of nature. Fear became ritual, ritual became belief. Our ancestors began to connect their actions to outcomes they couldn't explain. A successful hunt might follow a certain gesture or sound. A tragedy might follow the breaking of a pattern. Slowly, these coincidences evolved into sacred cause and effect. The first humans didn't yet have gods, but they had forces: wind, fire, storm, predator, and each one demanded respect. This primitive spirituality served a crucial purpose. It gave shape to the unknown. It turned chaos into narrative, fear into order. If lightning struck and killed, there must be a reason. If the hunt failed, perhaps the spirits were angry. Belief was protection, not physical, but psychological. It gave the illusion of control, and that illusion kept them sane in a world that offered no mercy. Even today, echoes of this instinct remain in us. We knock on wood, avoid certain numbers, whisper hopes into the air. These are the remnants of a survival mechanism millions of years old, our attempt to reason with the invisible. Faith, at its core, began as the most human of defenses, the need to make sense of fear. Through this fear, the earliest humans found meaning, and meaning gave them courage. It allowed them to walk into the storm and believe they were not alone. Death was the first great mystery that forced humans to look beyond the visible world. When a member of the group fell silent and still, the others didn't just walk away. They hesitated. They stared. Something inside them whispered that this couldn't be the end. That whisper, born from grief, confusion, and love, became the root of the first rituals of offering. Archaeologists have found ancient burial sites where early humans placed stones, animal bones, or fragments of food near the bodies of the dead. These gestures, small but profound, reveal that our ancestors sensed a continuity, that perhaps life didn't stop when the body did. In the golden grasslands of Africa, the act of covering the dead was not just protection from scavengers. It was a sign of respect, and maybe even hope. Picture it, the soft hum of wind over the savanna, the group gathered around the lifeless body of one of their own. A few steps forward, leaving behind a shiny pebble, a piece of fruit, or a carved bone. No one tells them to do it. It feels right. These primitive offerings might have been meant to help the spirit find its way, or to protect the living from whatever force had taken their companion away. Through these early acts, humans began to transform emotion into meaning. The rituals gave them a way to express pain and to maintain bonds with those who had vanished. It was as if, through these offerings, they were saying, "You still matter. You still exist somewhere." This was not just a ritual. It was the first declaration of spiritual empathy. In time, these simple gestures evolved into complex burial practices, sacred ceremonies, and the foundations of belief in an afterlife. Death no longer meant disappearance. It became transition. And through that transformation, faith deepened, carrying humanity toward a new understanding of existence and loss. So tell me in the comments, do you think these early offerings were acts of love, fear, or faith itself? Fire changed everything. It wasn't just a tool. It was a revelation. When the first flames danced before early humans, they saw something unlike anything in the natural world. It glowed, it moved, it devoured, and yet it gave warmth and light. Fire could protect them from predators, cook their food, and pierce the cold darkness of night. But more than that, it inspired awe. It was alive, unpredictable, and powerful, like a god. Imagine that first encounter. A bolt of lightning ignites dry grass. The flames roar and crackle as terrified hominids retreat, watching the fire consume everything in its path. But when the storm passes, curiosity overcomes fear. One brave figure steps closer, holding out a stick that catches the last ember. For the first time in history, a human doesn't just fear nature. They hold a fragment of it in their hands. That moment, silent and trembling, may have felt like touching the divine. In the African plains, fire became the center of life. Tribes gathered around it, not only for warmth, but for communion. The flickering light turned night into sacred space, where stories were born and ancestors were remembered. The fire's glow became a symbol of life itself, fragile, powerful, and eternal. Over time, humans learned to guard it, to feed it, to pass it on. Fire demanded respect. It punished carelessness and rewarded devotion. In that dynamic, a pattern of reverence emerged. It wasn't just energy, it was mystery. The flame could be kind or cruel, generous or destructive. It reflected the dual nature of existence, creation and destruction, light and darkness. As generations passed, this reverence evolved into myth. Many ancient religions, from the Zoroastrians to the Greeks, preserved fire as sacred, a link between mortals and the gods. But long before temples or legends, its worship began here in the savannas, where the first humans saw in its glow something greater than themselves. Through fire, they discovered power. Through power, they found meaning. And through meaning, they took another step toward becoming human. When words were still unborn, the first humans learned to speak through images. Deep within caves, hidden from sunlight, surrounded by silence, they painted. Shapes of animals, hands pressed in pigment, swirling lines that seemed to breathe with motion. These were not decorations. They were messages. Every stroke on those walls was a whisper to something unseen, a conversation with the spirits that ruled their fragile world. Picture a small group entering a dark cave, torches flickering. The air smells of smoke and earth. A figure grinds minerals into color and with trembling fingers traces the outline of a bison. Around them others hum or chant softly, their echoes bouncing through the stone like distant voices. This was ritual, not art for beauty, but for meaning. The painted creatures were not mere memories of the hunt. They were invocations, prayers painted in red and ochre. To draw was to give life. By capturing the image of an animal, early humans believed they could summon its spirit or influence their fate. The cave became a sacred threshold between the living and the unseen. The walls absorbed their fears, hopes, and gratitude, transforming them into something eternal. Every mark was both communication and creation, the first spiritual dialogue between humans and the cosmos. Scientists studying sites like Lascaux and Chauvet find layers of soot, footprints, and pigment that tell stories of generations returning to the same chambers. These caves were temples long before temples existed. The flickering light from the flames made the painted animals seem to move, as if answering the prayers of those who made them. For the first time, humanity wasn't just surviving nature. It was speaking to it. Art, in this ancient sense, was not a pastime. It was belief itself, made visible. Through these paintings, humans declared, "We exist, and we are not alone." It was through this act of creation that they first felt the presence of the invisible, and through that presence they found the soul of faith. As human groups grew larger and more complex, faith evolved with them. No longer limited to the fear of storms or the mystery of fire, spirituality began to take shape through symbols, physical objects that carried invisible power. These were the first totems, carved bones, stones, or pieces of wood representing animals, spirits, or ancestors. In their shapes, early humans saw identity, unity, and protection. Imagine a small tribe gathered around a sacred figure, perhaps a wooden carving of a bird, a lion, or a human face. It is not the object itself that holds power, but what it represents, the spirit that watches over the group. The totem is touched before a hunt, raised before battle, or placed beside the sick. Through it, the tribe believes they are connected to something eternal. In the vast, unpredictable world of prehistory, that sense of belonging was survival itself. Totemism marked a turning point in the human spirit. It transformed faith from an individual feeling into a collective identity. Each tribe began to define itself through its sacred symbol. The bear tribe, the eagle tribe, the serpent tribe. Each saw its totem as both ancestor and protector. To harm it was to harm the tribe. To honor it was to honor life. These symbols also carried moral meaning. The totem taught behavior. If one's totem was the wolf, courage and loyalty became sacred values. If it was the deer, gentleness and harmony guided their ways. Through these beliefs, early humans began to form ethics, a spiritual compass rooted in nature itself. Archaeological traces, carvings, figurines, painted emblems, reveal how deeply these symbols were revered. Long before written myths, totems told the story of who humans believed they were and where they came from. They were bridges between the living and the dead, the seen and the unseen. So tell me in the comments, if you had lived among those ancient tribes, what totem do you think would have chosen you? In every ancient tribe, there came a moment when ordinary humans realized that some among them could walk between worlds. These were the shamans, the first mediators between the visible and the invisible, the living and the spirits. They weren't chosen by birth or strength, but by vision. Through trance, illness, or dreams, they experienced what others could not, and from that mystery emerged one of humanity's oldest and most powerful roles. Imagine the tribe gathered in silence. A shaman sits before the fire painted with ash and red earth. Smoke rises as herbs burn, filling the air with a scent that seems to blur the boundaries of reality. The shaman sways, eyes closed, murmuring sounds that shift from words to rhythm. Around them, the people watch, part fear, part faith. In that moment, they believe this person can speak with the spirits, heal the sick, call for rain, or guide the souls of the dead. The earliest, shamans likely found their calling through altered states, brought on by fasting, dancing, or natural hallucinogens. These experiences convinced them, and those around them, that they could reach beyond the material world. Their visions offered guidance, comfort, and a sense of control over life's uncertainty. The shaman became the tribe's spiritual anchor, healer, storyteller, and keeper of the sacred. What made their power so profound wasn't just belief, it was connection. The shaman represented the first recognition that humanity might not be alone in the universe, that there were realms of existence just beyond the senses. Through ritual, song, and trance, they built bridges to those unseen worlds, giving shape to mysteries that science would only begin to name thousands of years later. In the flicker of firelight and the echo of drums, faith found a voice, not in temples, but in the trembling breath of a human being who dared to listen to the silence between worlds. Death was never just an ending for early humans. It was a question that refused to fade. When a loved one's body grew still, something within the living sensed that what made them alive had gone somewhere. But where? That mystery ignited one of the deepest, most enduring beliefs of humanity, that death is not final but a passage. In prehistoric burials, archaeologists have found clues that reveal how profoundly our ancestors felt this truth. Graves lined with red ochre, as if to imitate the yao color of life. Tools and food left beside the dead, as if for a journey, and animal bones placed as companions or protectors. These gestures were not random. They whispered of hope, the hope that those who had departed continued to exist, somewhere beyond sight. Imagine a moonlit night on the savannah. A small group gathers around a shallow grave. They hum softly, touching the earth with trembling hands. Perhaps they believed their companion would awaken in another world, one where the hunt never failed and the fire never died. In that belief, grief became bearable. Faith transformed loss into meaning. Over time, this idea evolved into complex visions of the afterlife, realms of spirits, ancestors, and eternal return. The dead were no longer gone. They became guardians watching over the living. This connection between generations formed the first spiritual lineage, giving purpose to both life and death. Even in the earliest human art, we find echoes of this longing, figures that seem to rise, floating between worlds, surrounded by symbols of transformation. The afterlife wasn't merely a place, it was a promise that existence had value beyond decay. And perhaps that promise is what truly defined humanity. The refusal to accept that consciousness ends with breath, and the courage to believe that love, spirit, and memory could survive the grave. The story of faith is, in many ways, the story of us. From the trembling awe before a thunderstorm to the whispered prayers, carved into stone, every generation of humans carried forward one unbroken thread, the instinct to search for meaning beyond survival. That instinct shaped how we thought, how we loved, how we built societies. It gave birth to cooperation, art, morality, and imagination. Without it, we might still be creatures of instinct. With it, we became creators of destiny. As humans spread across continents, their expressions of faith multiplied. What began as gestures toward unseen powers became organized belief systems, mythologies, and rituals. But the core emotion, that ancient mixture of wonder and fear, remained the same. Whether through the smoke of a fire or the silence of a cave, humanity never stopped asking the same question. Why are we here? Spirituality gave us more than comfort. It gave us identity. The need to belong to something greater than oneself bound tribes together, creating the foundations of culture. Through shared myths and sacred stories, humans learned empathy, discipline, and purpose. The invisible world shaped the visible one. Every civilization that rose from the dust carried in its heart a divine idea born millions of years before language itself. And though science now explains the lightning, the stars, and the fire, the same pulse remains inside us, that quiet certainty that life is more than flesh and bone. The first humans may have raised their eyes to the sky in fear, but we raise ours today in wonder. Somewhere between those two, emotions lies the essence of what makes us human. So if this journey through our spiritual origins moved you, like this video, subscribe for more explorations into humanity's hidden past, and tell us in the comments, we are still searching for the sacred, even within ourselves. And don't miss our next video, where we explore how ancient symbols and myths shaped the very first civilizations.